Hey friends, so a few episodes ago I mentioned that I was going to do a separate video on shame because it's a topic that I think is really not discussed enough. I suppose that's ironically appropriate in some way. Shame is one of those emotions that we all feel, but we mostly do not talk about. But the thing is that the more we don't talk about it, the more power it has over us. And that's what we're going to talk about in this video. Now, look, shame is really a damaging emotion. It's one of those that grows and gets worse over time. Left unchecked, it seeps into the core of a person and makes them feel like there's something wrong with them. You probably already know and understand this, but there's something that you may not realize about shame, my friends. It is learned behavior. We are not born with it. We learn it from watching other people struggle with it. We hear and see things in our families or our environments that make us take it on, sometimes without even knowing it. We experience some kind of traumatic event that makes us feel like we should feel it. So we do. Then later in life, we feel like when we make mistakes, we have to take that emotion on because, as we often say, when you know better, you do better, right? Well, sometimes we do know better, but we aren't able, for whatever reason, to do better. That is usually a sign of shame anyway. But getting ourselves into this trap usually brings even more shame into the equation, and it becomes a vicious cycle. We are ashamed about something, and the process of hiding it or pretending it didn't happen or doesn't exist brings more shame, and that keeps getting piled on and on. Ask me how I know. Sometimes shame starts out small. Maybe we are teased about something about ourselves. For example, being too sensitive. Maybe you have been teased about having too many emotions or feelings or not being tough enough. That may cause you to take on some shame about that, even though there is nothing wrong with being a sensitive person. And I hate that the world makes you think it's somehow uncool or weak to be kind and empathetic. The opposite is actually true, and there is no glory whatsoever in being a jerk. It's nothing to be proud of. But anyway, I digress. When you take on this shame about being too sensitive, it can make you subconscious, leading you to hide your emotions, to feel insecure and anxious about simply being yourself. Sometimes you'll create this suit of armor for yourself to hide all of that, pretending that you are so tough and you don't care about anything, etc., and so on. You internalize all your feelings and don't express them because your shame has programmed you to keep it suppressed. That can start in childhood, and when you fast forward to adulthood, you become the man who won't cry or show emotion because boys don't do that, and they get made fun of when they do. Or you become the woman who pushes away every good thing and good person that comes into your life because you have convinced yourself that you're not worthy of anything good. Or you become the adult who always tries to make themselves smaller or less than because you have been told you're too much for so long that even you believe it now. This is what shame does, and if you carry it around long enough, it can color every single thing you do, often whether you realize it or not. This is true even when the shame you're carrying is over something that you didn't do or ask for. Shame doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care whose fault the thing actually is. It's going to try to get in whatever door is the closest and most convenient. Now, let's get one thing clear before we continue. A lot of people often confuse guilt and shame, thinking that they are the same thing. They are, in fact, not. Guilt is something we feel over things we have actually done, not things done to us. Or it can be about going against our own ethics or not doing something that was expected of you, etc. It's the voice of your conscience that is sitting there like this, hiding your face because you cannot believe what you did. For example, we may have taken out our anger on the wrong person. We may have hurt someone else by being selfish or careless with their feelings. We might have caused someone else deep pain and suffering. We may have deceived someone or taken advantage of them, and so on. We may have made a mistake that affected us gravely, or other people, or both. I think you get the picture here. And when those things happen, most people do feel guilt, and that is a perfectly natural emotion. I mean, some people might not. Some people don't actually give a crap about how their actions affect other people, just so long as they get what they want. But that's a topic for a whole other video. Anyway, guilt is natural, and often with time and making amends, it subsides. Apologies help, especially when it comes to forgiving yourself. Guilt allows and makes room for repair. You can learn and grow from it, and of course not make the mistake again. That is part of your growth. Shame focuses on the self only. It's not about doing something bad, it's the idea that you are bad. As we said earlier, something is wrong with you. We are defective. We don't measure up to others. We are damaged goods, so to speak. Friends, despite its power over us, shame is a pretty one-dimensional emotion. It doesn't make us change. It also doesn't make other people change, which is why I always mention that you cannot shame people into changing for the better, because they will not. They have to work through their own guilt and shame to get there. But anyway, the biggest obstacle with shame is that you cannot grow in a place where it lives. We usually feel like we can't anyway. We feel alone and flawed and incapable of getting out of this prison that we put ourselves in. All we tend to do is either hide or stay silent, letting it marinate, so to speak. We don't speak about it or otherwise release it. Our first reaction is almost always to hide. So instead of dealing with our issues, we throw ourselves into work or a hobby or some other mindless activity. Instead of walking away from unhealthy relationships with other people, we attach to those people even more. We withdraw from our social support systems like our family or our friends because we don't want to address the elephant in the room, even though they see the elephant too. But if we just maybe stay quiet and tiptoe around it, maybe they won't notice it. Maybe we'll forget that it's there too. In one way or another, all this to say is we stay some form of silent. And that is one of the biggest mistakes we make ever. Because it is silence that gives shame its power in the first place. It thrives on secrecy and fear of judgment. It is often what causes us to engage in self-destructive behaviors or self-sabotage. Sometimes it makes people attack others or judge them. I think author and poet Hermann Hesse said it best when he said, "If you hate a person, you hate something in him that is part of yourself. What isn't part of ourselves doesn't disturb us." So, what can we do about all of this? Just decide that shame is not cool anymore and let it go? I mean, in theory, yes, but in reality, it's not that simple at all. We can, however, start with having courage to call it by its name. Speak about it. You can start with yourself. Every time you find your shame telling you, "You're a failure, you're a disappointment," you come at it with a rebuttal. "No, I am not a failure. I simply failed at this thing, not everything." Shame gets confused here because, well, you just smacked it with the truth. And that truth is, in case it's not clear, you are not defined by your past mistakes or failures. The more you speak about shame, the less powerful it becomes. This is especially true when we share our stories with people who understand, who respond with empathy. They are out there, and sometimes hearing someone else speak about it helps them in their journey too. And speaking of empathy, that is another step. It is a beautiful thing to have empathy for others, but it is just as important to have it for yourself. Shame can't compete with that either. If you don't allow it to take from you, that you are human and entitled to make mistakes, it can't. And this part, empathy, is especially important when the shame you are carrying around is not even about something that you personally did, but is something that happened to you. And that is often the source of a lot of people's shame, and it really should not be that way. You didn't ask for trauma. You didn't ask for abuse or mistreatment. You didn't ask to be abandoned or hurt or whatever the source of what happened is. Carrying shame about it is unfortunately what we tend to do. But we don't have to own that. In order to truly heal, you have to take that shame and not just name it, but return it to sender, so to speak. Put it back on the person or thing that was the perpetrator. They are the ones who should harbor the guilt and shame, not you. You're the survivor here. You should start treating yourself like one. And the place to start is definitely putting shame in the place where it belongs. Once you start doing that, the rest is a bit easier. No, it really is, because remember, the more you look shame in the eye, the more it backs off. And it is from this place that you can start healing and repairing. You can start with your inner dialogue. Stop the negative self-talk and replace it with something that is positive and meaningful. I'll give you an example, but it is something benign on purpose because I don't want what I'm about to say to be triggering for anyone. We'll talk about triggers, by the way, in a moment. But anyway, let's say you want to build a house. So you go down to IKEA and buy a house kit. House effing groovin', or whatever they would call it, if such a thing existed. But soon, you find out you bit off way more than you can chew, and you become this guy. As someone who recently put together a lot of IKEA stuff, this hit a little close to home for me. Oof. Anyway, you put your house together, or at least you tried to, but everything fell down. It is now house effing kaput. Not what you ordered, I know. Everyone who is driving by can see your spectacular failure, and you naturally are feeling some shame about it. So you never pick up a hammer or nail or build another thing again. In fact, you pack up and move to Alaska because you cannot stand the shame and embarrassment of facing your neighbors, right? No, wrong. This is not the answer. Having a heart-to-heart with yourself is, though. Recognize that seeing if IKEA sells parkas and snowshoes you can exchange for that house kit is not going to help you overcome your shame about that failure. So instead, you remind yourself that it's important to know your limits, and it's okay to admit that you don't know how to do things. It doesn't make you stupid or lazy or incompetent. You pick up the pieces from that house kit and donate them to charity. I recommend Habitat for Humanity, just saying. And you keep pursuing that dream. You watch some YouTube videos. You ask some friends who know more about construction and building than you. And when you're ready, you go back to IKEA. You buy an end table. You put that together. You get better tools. You move on to bigger things gradually. And then one day, you look around and you've built that whole damn house, one piece at a time. You've done it after all. As ridiculous as you may think that metaphor is, what's the message in that mess? To paraphrase Oprah. Learn and accept that you can do anything, but you cannot do everything. So do what you can until you get where you want to be, even if it's one step at a time. And in that place, shame over the previous failure will have left the building. No pun intended. No loss, only lessons. And there is, my friends, a huge difference between a loss and a lesson. So, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, we're going to talk about triggers for a sec. When you are actively in a place of shame that you are trying to heal from, it is so very important to make sure that you know what your triggers are and avoid those things or people. Put yourself in the presence of people who love and support you. Do things that enrich you. Sometimes just talking about the things that you are feeling shame about, even if what the other person does is nothing but listen, it can help tremendously. We cannot always avoid triggers, unfortunately. Sometimes they seem to be everywhere. The same goes for people who are triggering. That's why figuring out what those triggers are is so very important, because then when you absolutely cannot avoid them, you can at least manage that. And yeah, sometimes we place ourselves in the way of the triggers anyway. We continue to do things we know we shouldn't. We keep a tab on people who did us wrong or betrayed us even when we know it's not healthy, and that brings the shame front and center. I don't know how else to say stop doing that, but stop doing that. Don't let those things derail your healing. We made a video about that very subject a couple of weeks ago. It's called Stop Staying Updated on People Who Were Not Good for You. If you are struggling to avoid some completely avoidable triggers, give it a watch. I sincerely hope that it helps you. So, listen, there is something that I have said on this channel a few times now, but it's worth repeating because it's highly relevant to what this video is about, and that is almost everything you do in your life can be put in two categories: self-love or self-sabotage. Yes, even things that happened to you which were out of your control. You may not have been able to make choices in what happened, but you can make choices in how you handle those things. Anyway, unfortunately, we are much more likely to choose the self-sabotaging things over self-love things. They are just, I don't know, they just seem easier, at least in the short term. However, self-sabotage is just not ever a winning strategy. And so much of it is fueled by shame. The more we do it, the more shame we feel. And that is such a difficult cycle to break ourselves from. But we really have to, because friends, you already know in life you're going to find plenty of obstacles, plenty of people who are rooting against you. Sometimes it's the people that you would least suspect are. There are plenty of people who want you to fail. They want you to be miserable because they are. Since you know this is going to happen in some way or another, don't go become one of those very obstacles in your way by encumbering yourself with shame that you don't address or process. Shame should be reserved really for things that we chose to do, not the circumstances that life placed on us, not the things that happened to us. And when you feel it for legitimate reasons, because, you goofed, that's okay. But talk about it out loud. Accept that it's there, but do not let it stay so long that it keeps tearing away at the parts of us that believe and know that we are capable of changing for the better. Accept that, yes, as humans, we are all flawed. We all make mistakes, and that's okay. We learn from them, and we do better for the next time. The way out of shame is the same way out of just about everything else. It's to own it and keep walking through. Keep going past those ashes. Show up messy. Show up not completely prepared. Show up late. Show up even though you don't feel like it today or even this week. Show up however you are right now, but friends, show up. Because if you don't show up for yourself, who will? Remember that you are not your shame. You are not your mistakes. You are not what has happened to you. You are what you choose to become. But don't shame yourself into changing. Love yourself into making evolutions. It's not the only step in releasing shame, but it is a great first one, and it's a big one too. That's all I've got for you this week. I will be back next week with another priority message. Until then, take good care of yourselves. Bye.